This is Spider-Man No Way Home, and in this video is every single hidden detail that I have found while watching this movie 12 times. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So we start off exactly where Far From Home left us, and when Peter goes down to protect MJ, this lady starts to confront him and says that if you watch closely, Peter actually didn't hit her, it was MJ. Then inside Peter's apartment, May and Happy both get pinged by the same info screen, which is a reference to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse when everyone was notified by the death and identity reveal of Spider-Man, which is exactly what is happening in this movie right now. The Daily Bugle shows a picture of Peter Parker and turns it black and white, which could be a reference to Mr. Negative, who is a Spider-Man villain. And when Damage Control seizes Peter, we get shown some of the photos they took as evidence, where we see the Iron Spider case, which doesn't actually have the suit charging inside of it, which means that Peter was wearing it the entire time. And we also see that Peter leaves the Edith glasses just lying around, and I'll get back to this later in the video. We see all the windows are boarded up with newspapers, and this is to stop the Daily Bugle and other news sources from spying on Peter like they did earlier in this movie. Then Peter and May move in with Happy, and on this table we can see that he still kept his boxing gear from his past days with Tony in Iron Man 2. And then cut to Peter and MJ talking when MJ's phone is a Sony Xperia XZ2 because, well, Sony. And Peter's phone is all cracked at the top because of all the fights and falls it's been through. Fast forward to Doctor Strange's first appearance where he is floating through the air and he leaves a ripple of snow throughout the air. Whoa. Cut to the spell scene where Strange starts casting the spell. We see that the rings follow his hand movements, and whenever he stops and his hand starts shaking again, we can see that the rings also follow that exact same movement. And then in the end, just before the spell got out of hand, notice the path his hand makes with the spell. It overlaps by accident when Strange is telling Peter to stop talking, which then causes that spell to go out of control and be corrupt. So technically, it is entirely Strange's fault that the spell went wrong, as not only was he not concentrating, but he also forgot to set the warnings before casting.
You changed my spell. You don't do that. I told you, and that is why.
Then the ground starts cracking and all hell breaks loose. And behind Peter, you can actually see one of Doc Ock's tentacles slowly making its way into the universe. While Peter is attempting to scan these cars, Flash sends a photo of him and the MIT lady, and in the picture he is handing over his Flashpoint book, which we find her reading in the car later in this scene. And also in the display, we see Edith is offline in the top corner. And remember how I mentioned that Peter is just leaving the glasses lying there in his room? Well, I think this is because Peter uploaded Edith into his Iron Spider suit, just like Mysterio uploaded Edith into his fishbowl helmet. And this is why he no longer cares about the glasses, because he now has a copy of Edith in the suit itself. And the only way someone can now use those glasses is with Peter's several facial recognition and voice recognition IDs, so now the only way someone can actually have access to Edith is if they take down the central servers, which is very unlikely. Well, crap. And also on the right side of the HUD, we see his different webs or gadgets, and this is what he later uses to secure the car when going down to rescue the MIT lady. And also the display shows these faint lines zooming in then out, which is actually representing Peter's mechanical lenses, as we see the size of the eyes before and afterwards. And now when Doc Ock makes his appearance, the camera pans to each individual tentacles as they appear, which isn't really the coolest of details, but I really appreciate the extra effort that they went to make this entrance a lot more dramatic and to really capture all that destruction of the arms. Now back to Peter putting extra webs on the car. He actually does this after failing to keep himself up in the lift during Spider-Man Homecoming, because Peter learns from his mistakes. Whoa, wait, wrong YouTuber. Moving on. Now Peter is taking control of the tentacles due to the fact that they are both nanotech and the connection works both ways. But notice when Peter takes control of the arms, the lights immediately turn white and turn towards Peter, and the arms stay white throughout the rest of this movie. And also just before he does take over the arms, the tentacles turn over to look at Otto and shakes as if the AI in the arms are trying to tell him to take the nanotech off, since the AI realizes that there is a third-party device interfering with him. Then when Peter goes to rescue the MIT lady, he shakes his right arm, which deactivates the Iron Spider suit. Now back in the Sanctum Sanctorum, where we see part of the snow on the stairs is already melted, as well as being able to see that the whole building is dripping from the snow, and because of that, they decided to dry off some of the papers by hanging it on some lampshades. Then they find the location of Electro, and on Peter's way springing there, MJ says,
"I genuinely don't know how you do this without throwing up."
Which is a reference to the game Spider-Man Miles Morales, when his best friend Ganke said the similar thing when he was watching Miles through the mechanical lenses.
How are you not puking all the time? Lots of practice!
Electro and Sandman is now contained in the Sanctum Sanctorum, where we see the dial with the controls of each of them, and we see that there are 9 total cells, but 5 of them are occupied, even though only 4 of the villains are there. And this is because the tree was taking up one of these cells. Then the villains talk to each other, and Dr. Connors actually recognized Max, which shows how Max wasn't actually a nobody like he originally thought he was, and that people did in fact recognize him for his work in designing the power grid in his universe. Now when Peter sends Strange into one of these cells, Strange spins around, the cloak of levitation accidentally cuts shots of Sandman's body, which he grew back almost instantly, so it became this really subtle detail that's really hard to notice. You can see that the snow in the Sanctum Sanctorum is almost fully melted away, which shows how the Sanctum has progressed throughout this movie. And now Peter is knocked into his astral form, and then we get our first ever visual representation of his spider sense working. I have a separate video all about this, which you can watch after this if you want more detail on how it works, because I want to keep this video as short as I possibly can. So in Peter's quest to fix everyone, Doc Ock was first. So while working on his new chip, he had his hand under the chip to catch any of the pins in case it accidentally drops. And then he goes to give him the new chip, and the holograms of the arm follows the exact same movements as the tentacles in real life. After giving Octavius the new chip and fixing his mind, the nanotech that creates the integrated suit takes the form of the black logo on the Iron Spider suit, but this time it's gold. So it really is a hybrid of both the suits. Now Peter is giving Max his cure, and the lights on the device lights up at the same time as the progress bar on the laptop. Now I'm guessing most of you didn't even notice that there was a progress bar on the laptop. Cut to outside where we see that Jameson arrives at the scene, and listen to what he says when the camera is now in Lizard. And then literally in the next scene, when Peter's tingle goes off, we hear a faint noise of police sirens.
I don't know. May?
And later in the fight, we see that the police have arrived. This shows us how good his tingle is, as he can hear and sense that police siren that is still ages away. Then notice when Electro grabs the arc reactor, the electricity starts making the fabricator fold up again. And later in the fight, when Peter webs down on Green Goblin and pushes him down through the balcony, which is a reference to the Spider-Man PS4 game, when Peter done the exact same thing to Kingpin. Now near the end of the battle, Goblin says,
"The weakness, Peter, is morality."
And he was actually talking about May being Peter's weakness, as Goblin earlier described that Peter is fighting May's moral mission.
Saw how she trapped you, fighting her holy moral mission.
When MJ tells Peter that some people are here, you can actually see that Peter notices something was off even before MJ tells him, and he makes that same face that he makes when his spider sense goes off, showing how he was already alerted that Toby and Andrew was there. Then Toby and Andrew makes Tom feel better, and they head inside the school to fix the cures. And just before we do, we get a shot of the school with the lights turning off. Toby says he's got the Goblin cure. Notice how long Tom stares at the vial. This indicates how he still isn't over the fact that Goblin killed Aunt May.
Gotta cure all of them. Right?
Right.
Then at the end, MJ refuses to expect disappointment when going into the final battle, which ended up leading her to the biggest disappointment in her whole life. Now fast forward to the location of the final battle, where we finally get to see the long-awaited Statue of Liberty, which is brown rather than green. This shows that they also decided to give it a paint job to make it look newer, and near the end of the film we see these green chunks laying around, which shows how inside the statue is still green, but the outside is made to look new to indicate the new era of superheroes. Then we meet Electro again, who now has the arc reactor powering him, and this causes the electricity to form around him, resembling the comic accurate mask. And later when he attacks Andrew's Peter, he says he actually sets Andrew's foot on fire. Next up, when all three Peters are fighting Electro, Tom's Peter launches himself behind Electro, but then Electro turns behind to look at what's coming and then quickly zaps below him to blast him. Then we see the actual cure for Max, which has an extra device on top, and this is to speed up the process of removing all the electricity after Peter recognised the fact that Electro had plenty of time to make up his mind in the last second when Goblin was trying to change his mind, because Peter learns from his mistakes. Then Ned accidentally portals in Doctor Strange, who then goes on to say that he has been dangling over the Grand Canyon for 12 hours. Now previously in Spider-Man Homecoming, we learned that Peter's webs only lasted 2 hours, which means if Strange was hanging there for 12 hours, there must have been some huge upgrades made to his webbing. As the spell expands out, the ring creates a ripple throughout the water, continued by the same ring that hit the ground, and is later seen expanding out and making a rift beneath the Statue of Liberty. And moving to the rift itself, we see that it is cracking away like shards of glass, which is how the multiverse is represented, as well as shown in the poster of both Multiverse of Madness as well as the Watcher's multiversal hub in What If. Then in the fight with Goblin, Peter lands a punch that really dents that shield, which shows how he isn't pulling back his punches and he really does want Norman dead for what he has done. Peter asks Strange to make everyone forget his identity, and as soon as the spell starts to get casted, the rifts immediately start closing. And as the final spell covers the earth, the runes are also shown flying away in the reflection of the water. Again, great attention to detail. Fast forward to when everyone's forgotten who Peter Parker is, he heads to MJ's shop with notes on what to say after he screwed up what to say to the MIT lady, who asks,
You didn't rehearse that, did you, Peter?
because Peter learns from his mistakes. And then, moving on to the final swing, where we see this really close-up shot of Spider-Man's mask, we see that the lenses themselves are now cloth. However, there are shadows on the outline of these lenses, meaning how he still has mechanical lenses. There is no tech in the actual eyes anymore. And that may be the end of the movie, however there is more in the credits, because as Zendaya's name is shown. Behind her, we can see the notes that Peter wrote to say to MJ when going to the shop. As well as behind Jacob Batalon, we see Peter's college rejection letter, and all the way in the end, we see that Ned's mom is referred to as Ned's Lola, which is a callback to when MJ accidentally called her Ned's Lola in this scene.
Night, Lola.
Good night, Ned's Lola.
So that is everything that I have found in this movie, and I only decided to include the detail that I personally found, so if some other details that other YouTubers have found isn't here, then it's because either I decided to leave them out to keep this as original as possible, or because I have already mentioned it in one of my other breakdowns, which you can see on the screen now.